and get started because we have a really fascinating program today, I think, for all of you. For those of you that have participated previously with us, you know that this is our third year of having monthly conversations about the journey toward equity in education. This year, we wanted to particularly focus in on whether or not the pandemic is offering, with all of its hardships, some silver lining as well in terms of things that may help us as we continue transformation in our schools. Last spring, when the pandemic forced schools to close and move to online instruction, it quickly became fairly obvious that there were many students that weren't able to log in or to log in adequately to do work well and to benefit fully from distance learning. And there was some immediate concern that this would even exacerbate the existing disparities. Over the summer, as it appeared that schools would have to remain shuttered in the fall, there were discussions around the community about how we should respond to help students that were having difficulty. In some cases, there were organizations such as Imprints Cares, Best Choice, Turn, recreation centers, and others. They were already offering summer programs and already learning how to follow CDC guidelines and how to help struggling students. But in addition, it was obvious that we were going to need many more additional locations. So there were grassroots efforts to quickly try to ramp up remote learning centers in addition to those that were already operating. All of these centers were learning as they went how to offer full day assistance and help students get on and supplement and augment what teachers were doing so wonderfully in the Zoom world as they tried to offer instruction in that way. And by August, it seemed really imperative to make sure that we not only maintained any existing sites, but added them. Partnerships were then being formed, often between congregations or church locations, a local school that they might already have a relationship with, a nonprofit agency, perhaps one that already had some experience with using the CDC guidelines, other nonprofit agencies to see if we could could open some additional sites. As a result of this, we know that well over 400 or 500 students were being served in locations like this around the community. By October, we began to survey these centers to see if we could hear what they were learning, what the challenges were that the students faced, what the challenges were that the sites faced, what the benefits were of these community locations. And the hope was that not only would we learn from specific locations, but we could begin to elevate that to the macro level and to say, is there any systemic way, in an ongoing way, that the community can be more involved in supporting schools and complementing what schools do, and move, therefore, the needle that we've tried so hard to move in this community in terms of disparities in student achievement. So we ask a lot of questions, we learn some lessons. Today, we're going to focus in on one of these locations. There were many others doing a wonderful job, so we don't mean to leave them out, but we chose one that involved a church, a school, a nonprofit agency, and we want to hear about their experience. And we've also asked Tricia McManus, our new interim superintendent, to be helping us think about that from the systemic view. Because one of the things that kept coming up as we surveyed sites was their desire to have more coordination, more cross-agency communication, ways to know best practices, evidence-based practices, better ways to work with the school system, both locally and on an administrative level. So we hope that we can learn a lot. We're going to have a panel this morning involving Dr. Scovens from Galilee Missionary Baptist Church. We're going to have Betty Wace from Imprints Cares. We're going to have Alicia Bailey, the principal at Petrie. We're also going to hear from Tricia McManus. So we've got a wonderful panel for you. Sylvia Oberly and I will be alternating and asking questions as we go along. You may feel free to use the chat mechanism if you have additional questions you want to raise. We've got a full program. So Sylvia, I'm going to turn it over to you for further introductions and start the questions.
Well, thank you, Dean, and welcome to everyone. We're so glad you've all joined us today. And as Dean said, we're excited to have our 4 panelists who will share the experiences of the Remote Learning Center at Galilee Missionary Baptist Church in partnership with Imprints Cares, with Petrie Elementary School, and with others in the community. So as Dean said, we have Reverend Scovens joining us. He's the senior pastor at Galilee and a leader in our faith community. Ms. Betty West is the Director of Expanded Learning Services at Imprints Cares, and that's a outreach portion of Imprints. In addition, Ms. Alicia Bailey, the principal of Petrie Elementary School, whose students were among those enrolled at the center, and Ms. Tricia McManus, the new interim superintendent of Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, who brings to us a strong lens of equity and achievement. So to start us out, I'm going to ask each of our panelists in turn to spend just a few minutes responding to 2 initial questions. What did you as a partner bring to this effort? And how were your roles different and complementary? Dr. Scovens, we'll start with you.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Dean, and to everyone assembled here today. I'm grateful for the opportunity and looking forward to future partnerships with both Imprints and Petrie Elementary School. In terms of how our role, I'm really a behind the scenes guy. I haven't been out front. To be honest with you, I have a team at the church and they kind of work with me on this. One being Shaquille Whitehead, who has a connection with Imprints. And we already had a relationship with Petrie over the years. So it was a very easy fit for us. And our role was to basically just make sure that we provided space. We were approached by, I believe, Shannon Heck, and she brought this to us. And we immediately just said, yes, let's try to make it work. So that's been the main focus of what we're trying to accomplish by helping the students at Petrie and in the community.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Ms. West?
Yes, good morning. Again, I want to thank Pastor Scovens because he did provide what is so needed coming from our nonprofit is the brick and mortar. We feel confident that through our past work, having a crisis care program last spring, offering summer camps throughout the summer. And at that time, we were able to use the schools, but once we started this fall, that was not possible. So the brick and mortar building at Galilee Church is just, first of all, it's an amazing place to be. It's a beautiful community. And so we are just honored that we can bring our children there from Petrie. So that set the stage for the success we're having. And along with that, we want to thank our community partners that financially helped us, including United Way and many, many community-focused people. Working together is what we do best at Imprints Cares. And so we're a strong partner. We've always been able to collaborate. But really this year, the faith-based community reaching out to us and then working with the schools has just really been wonderful.
Thank you, thank you. So Ms. Bailey, as the principal of Petrie, a key role there, what was your role there and how was that complementary to the others?
At Petrie, of course, first, thank you guys for this space of being able to communicate with you guys to talk about engagement. So for us as a school, of course, as Dean mentioned earlier, when they made the announcement that we would be remote learning, we thought to ourselves, how in the world are we going to do this? But, we could not have done it without the partnership of Galilee Church as well as Imprints. And I can't speak enough about how they have really blessed us as a school to be able to have our kiddos to come there. So my role as principal, I'm sort of like Dr. Scovens, and we put together a team of engagement, a group of folks that will helped to initiate this process of getting our students online and how we engage families and communities. The church, as Dr. Scovens mentioned, we have a relationship with the church that goes far beyond the remote learning. It's a partnership, but we consider it also to be an adoption of our school because not only have they allowed our kiddos to come over and have a safe space to learn, it's a constant space that students need in order to perform academically. But they also offer food to us during Thanksgiving, as well as any activities that they're having throughout the year. They offer it to our students, like their trunk or treat that they just recently had. So it's not just a partnership, but it's an adoption. So thank you, Dr. Scovens. And then Ms. West has worked tireless with us to initiate this process. And I can't say enough about imprints. They have been extremely instrumental in getting our kids from one place to the next, because if we didn't have that partnership with imprints, our babies would not be able to get to the brick and mortar. And so they provide that transportation for us. So thank you to Ms. West, and thank you guys for the partnership.
And your enthusiasm is really catching. I love that. So how would you respond to those initial questions, Ms. McManus?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for letting us come together today to discuss our remote learning centers and the partnership with the district. I would say that what the district probably brought to the table first and foremost was the vision for every learner being successful. That's why this all happened in the first place, is because as we know, remote learning from lessons from last March, remote learning is not for everyone, and students need different opportunities and experiences if they're all going to excel. And so we brought a vision of, we've got to do something for our students to make sure that we don't have, that we have strong numbers of engagement and strong numbers of attendance for every one of our students. And so we brought a true need to the table, to the community, and a willingness to work with the community. But I will tell you, we learned a lot from the initial what we brought, and what's happening now are very different because of lessons learned along the way. And so I'm excited to share some of those, because it wasn't a perfect rollout by any means, but it's gotten better as we've learned about what are the needs of our centers and what are the needs of our students. And so we've brought resources to the table, but at the very beginning, we may not have even realized what those resources are. So some of the resources around Wi-Fi and books and things like that. And then lastly, what our roles are extremely complementary. I think that what I've loved about the centers is our teachers that are instructing students synchronously every day, they're still doing that. But the remote centers are ensuring that kids are actually being able to log in, that they're getting the additional tutorial and supports to be successful in the lessons. And then last but not least, so important that the remote learning centers are providing is just that moral support and contact that our kids that are completely remote are not getting and are missing. And so that contact, I had a chance to visit Imprints, one of their centers, and I was so excited because the kids were very happy to be there. So it's definitely been a great partnership, lots to learn, and I look forward to sharing more as we go on.
So thank you all for this overview, and I'll turn it over to Dean to continue this conversation among our panelists. As we said, we have a number of questions for them, but again, as you have questions, please pose those in the chat and we'll try to address those as well now or later. Thank you. Now, Dean.
I'll start by asking Dr. Scovens some questions, and I do want to make sure that everyone knows and hears clearly. These centers we're talking about had students with them in most cases all day long, for either 4 or 5 days a week. So kids were being brought to, often with transportation, to the center, and they were there. And often the students in a particular center might be attending a variety of schools. So the centers also had to help kids log in to a variety of locations. And one of the challenges that I know is going to come up was the challenge of having sufficient internet to have, I think at Galilee, for example, you had about 40 students, and that's a lot of kids logging on at any one point. So I just wanted to be sure you knew how extensive this work was. This was no longer just an after-school program where kids were there for an hour or so. They were there in most cases for the day. So Dr. Scovens, talk a little bit more about what motivated you and your church to be interested in even being a site for a remote learning center. I mean, that was a big step for you to take. And you must have considered some challenges as you began thinking about whether or not to do this.
Well, first and foremost, safety was a concern, not necessarily for the people at the church, but the children, and in making sure that they would be able to remain in a safe environment. But it was an easy decision for us, Dean. Most of you are familiar with Galilee, and we want to be a community church, not just a church in the community. And so it was an easy decision. We were already in discussions. We just didn't realize it was going to happen so fast. Our biggest challenge was not with students or Petrie or even imprints. It was with Spectrum, trying to make sure that we had proper internet running. And we had some challenges there, realizing only to find out that we did have enough already on site. But Spectrum, I think they were caught off guard in trying to provide the needs for each remote site. So that's important, as superintendent has made it clear that's probably the biggest challenge for any remote learning site, is that internet component.
Let me add another question, Dr. Scovens. As you got into this and as you have continued that work, what have been some of the benefits that you've seen, not only for the children, but for your church and your congregation?
Well, we were able to employ some of our members at the church, and we were able to bless several families through food distribution. We had several food distribution opportunities throughout the month of October and November, and we have even 3 more in this month that we'll be doing in December. And those young people were able to receive a box of food from that. We worked directly with Principal Bailey. And I think what's paramount is the communication that we have between Imprints, Galilee, and Petrie to make it all work. We see each other as a team. It's not 3 different units, it's one. And what we have done as a church is to kind of stay in the background and let them do school, because that's what they're good at. And so it's been a great partnership. We've had probably a few challenges, but nothing that we could not overcome.
Well, I'm aware that sometimes pastors lead and they have to bring behind them their congregation. Did you have any difficulty getting your congregation to agree to this?
Because we're virtual worshiping right now, and most of our programming is done outdoors, we were able to get through that. But we did get approval from our board of directors and making them aware. We decided to add another component to the safety in that we also have a cleanup crew to come through after Imprints does their cleanup. So there's really cleanup on top of cleanup, just to be sure. And that was just something that we decided to do as a church, to invest in the program itself. We don't see it as Petrie or Imprints at Galilee. We're one. And so we've been trying to make sure that we operate in that vein.
Ms. West, I'd like to ask you, I think it was very important to Dr. Scovens and his church to know that they had good operational management of this program. And as he said, the church didn't see itself as providing the actual instruction. So could you say a little bit about the experience and the expertise that you were able to bring that must have been reassuring to them?
Sure. As I said earlier, as soon as the school shut down last March, we immediately worked with the school system and began what we called crisis care for first responders and their families. But before we could even begin that, we went through extreme trainings. We reached out, of course, to the CDC, and we had lots of input from the Forsyth County Health Department. Our entire team was trained on how to clean, how to social distance, how to set up a room, how many children you can have in a room. So we began this very early on, as I said, back in March, and then continued it throughout our summer camp program. So again, as Tricia said, and everyone, it is a learning process. But and we're still learning because the CDC guidelines continue to change. But we felt it extremely important to make sure that safety was the first component of our program. And we just learned as we went. We stopped, we backed up, we did more training. So we felt really confident as we moved into the churches this fall. Again, we continue to have a close contact. The school system now has school nurses that come out and visit all of our sites on a regular basis, and they give us input. One last thing I think is very important to say, if we do have a situation where a child may come in or a parent will call and say, you know, I've been in contact with someone that has, our first line of action, we go to the health department immediately. And then fortunately, Tricia and them have hired Jennifer Corso, who was working with us at the health department. So she continues to be that person for us. As Nathan said, strong communication has been the best thing for our team. So that's where I think our expertise has come in.
Let me ask one more question, and you and Dr. Scovens can perhaps both respond, or Ms. Bailey. In terms of the staffing, what I know you were able to hire some people perhaps from the congregation. You also generally use certified teachers or substitute teachers. Is that correct?
That's correct. And fortunately, some of our employees that we didn't even know were Pastor Scovens' congregation already. I have a site supervisor at each site, and fortunately, the site supervisor that I chose was a member of Galilee Church, and she is a retired teacher. We employed several other retired teachers, substitute teachers.
Thank you. Okay, Sylvia.
Good. Before I
think
switch
also,
to, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think what made this special is that Principal Bailey had her teachers also to come over to make the young people feel comfortable, and they provided a certain level of support so that it was an easy transition for not only the students, but I think the parents felt more comfortable about it as well. Principal Bailey may be able to speak more to that.
And you had one man, you said too, right?
We do. We have a young man that works with us every day, and he's just phenomenal. And then, of course, Chad, who is part of the church congregation, he's been made a huge impact too. So again, we're a team. We've really become a team.
Good. So, Principal Bailey, tell us a little bit about the teachers' involvement there.
Yeah, so as Pastor Scovens mentioned, we have what we call our CARES team, our local CARES team here on the school level, which involves our guidance counselor, our social worker, our behavior support specialist, as well as our assistant principal. And so in order to transition the students with ease, we sent a team over for the start of the program. And I think, Betty, they came just about every day for about two or 3 weeks to be sure that the students were transitioning well. In addition to that, we provided some training with their staff to let them know, how we were doing schedule-wise and how teachers were logging students into different sites and things like that. So it's been, we've been a team throughout this process, and it's been exciting for our staff to go over, and then the kids to see our staff working with the church as well as imprints.
Mm-hmm. And is this a long-term benefit, you think, for your staff, and how might that grow in the future?
Absolutely. I foresee, I hope our partnership will continue throughout, even after the remote learning. We've had that relationship with the church for a while. And so we hope that partnership continues. It's been extremely beneficial to us. As Tricia mentioned before, the goal for us with engagement, we were hoping to get 80 with a goal of 100% of our students online for face-to-face instruction with our teachers. And we really could not have done it without having those students online. After a few weeks of the remote learning, we said, wow, we're at about 70% or so. And once the program got started, that pushed us to at least meet that 80% mark. So we're extremely proud to say that at Petrie, we have 87 to 90% of our students that are logging on for instruction every day. And that couldn't happen if we didn't have the team to help us to do that.
Right. So Ms. McManus, how does that's pretty high number. How does that compare across the system? That's pretty impressive.
So yes, so our goal is definitely 100%. I will say we've had ups and downs. We were excited in the beginning because we were also comparing to the spring rollout. And so we've probably, we have, I guess about 52,000 students approximately in our district. And we consistently have had at least about 50,000 that are actually logging into Canvas regularly, participating in their online classes. That still is not good enough because that means there's a couple thousand that we have got to do more. And that's what the CARES team is all about, is getting out home visits. And that's both the site-based and the district-based CARES team. So there's not a day that goes by that we're not having folks go out and do home visits. In some cases, we have found that students are not there and have needed to be either withdrawn or found. In other cases, we just need more support. And so that's what the CARES team has been about. But we've been, the remote learning centers have been supporting now. I know you mentioned a number earlier. It's about 700 students right now across the 40 remote learning centers. So that's 700 more students that potentially would not have been as successful with their learning as they are now as a result of the partnership.
Okay. And the question was asked in the chat, how many students again are at the Galilee Remote Learning Center?
We have between 30 to 40 children every day. And fortunately, we had one of our other locations had to come to a close of building, our time was over there. And I talked with Dr. Scovens last week, and I said, I have another group of children. It's about 10 or 12 children, and we have to continue serving them. So we're transporting them there now as well.
Okay.
Sylvia, I see another question in the chat about whether fees were being collected. So let me distinguish between two types of locations. There were some locations that were established last spring that were particularly focusing on children of parents who had to go outside the home to work. And in those cases, parents did pay fees and still pay fees now. There are sliding scales and scholarships available in most of these sites. The sites we're talking about now that were in churches, we were trying to be sure those were tuition free. And so there are not fees being charged in those locations. And there are, well, as Ms. McManus has already mentioned, there are many more locations than the 6 or 7 that I was particularly involved with, but there was some United Way money. Sheriff Kimbrough stepped up to the plate and raised money for a couple of sites. There were churches that donated money, including No Wood, but First Presbyterian and others. The churches donated their space, and if they had to up their game in terms of internet, they usually either covered that cost. So it really was a community effort, but those sites did not have fees, to specifically answer your question.
Mhm.
And to further answer that question, I would not have agreed to have a program where we would have to have a fee for the children. So that was one of my sticklers, that
Mhm.
we had to make sure that it was going to be free to the families.
I'd like to ask one more question, Sylvia, before we go to the next round, and that is Principal Bailey. I'm particularly interested in your thoughts about this. When we did the survey, most of the sites said that the majority of the children, when they first came to these locations, had either not logged in at all or had completed very few assignments. Were you able to see, for these students being served at Galilee, that they could get their assignments done and they were able to begin catching up?
Absolutely. So with our teachers, we have a block of time that's built in for makeup work. And so once we got them online, we were able to have them to make up the assignments that were missed prior to that. So we were able to build in some time where students can make up the assignments and work towards that. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions in the chat. I'll jump in for just a second to respond to them or to ask you to. One question from Paula McCoy, whether the staff are volunteers, and the answer to that is no. The staff were being paid, and that's one reason we had to find funds. In some cases, there may have been some volunteers, but this was not the kind of environment it was easy to invite volunteers in because of the pandemic. And so we had to have people that we couldn't just open the door, for example, and say, everybody in the church who wants to come help us. And so they had expert staff that were mostly experienced in education and that knew how to protect themselves as well as the children. Also, in this particular site, Imprints was able to provide their own buses to get kids there, because the question was asked about transportation. In some locations, children walk in. In other cases, parents actually drop kids off. Okay.
Thanks, Dean, for addressing those, because we do want to be able to highlight your questions as well. And one was asked earlier also concerning fees. How can we justify fees when the state constitution requires a sound, free, basic public education? So I know that the disparities, income disparities, and that could affect people's ability to access centers like that. Switching to the system level, Ms. McManus, any thoughts and concerns about that particular aspect and additional resources that the school system is identifying to help support these resource centers as well as the people attending them?
So as far as resourcing the centers, I do know that in many of the centers, we have sent out tutors. And the district is paying for those tutors. And so that is a service that we've provided. I'm not sure if any are go to Galilee. I think those might be Imprints, that staff that has been hired. But we do have tutors that go out to the different sites so they can provide more support. We also provided meals, so nutrition for students, and those are delivered to the different sites. We've provided, again, resources in the form of instructional materials where necessary. Again, our students are actually still taking part in the learning from their classroom teachers, I would think in most cases, because that's live instruction. And then the folks that are there are actually providing additional tutorials and resources. And so I think that when we started on this journey with the centers, we definitely wanted to make sure that this is about leveling the playing field. And so having students be able to access this if they can't afford it, which is many of our students just need a place to go to get this additional support. And so that was one of the first things we talked about, is we want this to be free for our families. And so in many of the centers, that's the case. In some, they are paying more, an all-day fee. Again, the original intent was somewhere the student could go that for a couple of hours, 3 or 4 hours while they're in there learning, and then they go home. In some of the centers, they're there all day. The parents are taking advantage of kind of an all-day childcare with instruction type of opportunity. So that there are some differences. But again, when I've talked to folks that are like imprints, it was critical that they did have a different scale and access to scholarships, which would provide families the free access as well. So I think that's really important. And so I'm glad it was brought up about fees versus no fees.
Thank you. Thank you. So as you're thinking about a systemic approach, building on these remote centers and moving forward, what are some of the conversations that are taking place at the systemic level? How to expand on this and grow from this in the future? Ms. McManus.
So I think what we've learned along the way this school year, as we rolled this out, we did not have every single thing that could potentially happen or resource that were needed outlined up front, like the addition of meal deliveries. We kept adding centers. There's about 40 now. I think that was asked. There are about 40 centers that are open right now. It is, if you go to our district webpage, they're outlined there where the centers are located. So that's available. I think someone asked that question as well. But basically, we want to continue these efforts. So part of this was the pandemic and knowing that since schools were not going to be open, that we needed a place for our students to go. To level the playing field is what this is about. Students needing additional supports, that they will get it. So it's really about meeting the needs of all learners. But as we think about it, this partnership with all of these community agencies, even if we come back in January and every student is in school, we want to continue these partnerships. And we've actually asked the remote learning centers to continue to have their doors open. Our vision moving forward would be that we keep this going actually indefinitely, even outside the pandemic, because what this partnership with our community is about is all hands on deck, everyone rallying around our students. We take ownership of their learning, and where there are achievement gaps, that is on us, and we are taking ownership of that. But we can accomplish so much more when there are many resources available, from after school where students have a place to go where they can continue their learning. If instead of potentially going home, maybe they can go to a center after school Saturdays. I know in the district I came from, I was in charge of some of our schools that were struggling, and I formed a partnership with our church. It was Allen Temple AME, and they provided during spring break a week of education and enrichment opportunities on Saturdays for Saturday academies. So this to me is the start of a ongoing partnership. But what I think it will take is for all of us to come together. Some of the people on this call, the agencies we're already working with, the faith-based organizations we're already working with, come together and figure out, okay, if we were to continue this partnership, even outside the pandemic, what would be our vision and goals for it? What resources do we have? I know that one of the things, I'd like us to be able to provide more funding. That's been an issue. We've provided what we could provide this year, which has been in resources and in people. We've added layers to the system of coordination because we knew that was an issue. And so Cheryl Wright, many of you have met her. She's done an amazing job now with coordinating between the centers. So adding that, we've added more staff to be able to provide support and communications because that was a gap along the way. So now that we know what it will take, we can start the planning for the future with some clear expectations, clear goals, and really create a great partnership. And then lastly, I've done some research on community, school-based, tutorial type of partnerships, and there's a lot out there, and they always talk about clarity around, what it is that students will be doing, clarity around what training do the adults have that will be interacting with students, clarity on what funding will be available and what resources. And so I think, again, we want to continue this partnership, strengthen it, and start that planning now for the future, now that we have so many lessons that we've learned along the way this year so far.
Thank you. A question was posed, how might individuals contribute to this and be a part of this? Obviously, churches, nonprofit organizations, a community effort. How can individuals be involved? Anyone, really.
Does anybody else want to take that?
Go ahead.
Well, I tell you, while you're thinking about that and getting ready to respond, maybe one way to leapfrog toward that is to ask Reverend Scovens, Principal Bailey, and Betty West, when you look forward, and think about what your partnership might look like as students begin going back to school. What would be your vision for a really helpful, coordinated effort as the three of you have talked about your teamwork? What might that look like in the future once kids are going back to school? And then we could ask Ms. McManus, what would that look like replicated? If we say the children are the community's children, and we ask schools to do a lot. And so what is the community's role in starting to be more of a lifter of the progress that you're trying to underwrite? What can we do together? So start where you are and say, what does it need to look like going forward, the three of you that have been working together? And then I'll ask McManus to speak to that.
Say, Dean, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, it takes a village in order for us to do this. We can't do it, by ourselves on the school level. And as the boots on the ground, we have to use all of the resources that we have. One of the things I would say that we've learned from this process on the school level is that consistency with students, and then the communication piece is key to helping us to get through that. And I mean in communication between our teachers, our staffing, and those folks that are the boots on the ground over at the church. Because as Tricia talked about, our teachers are teaching through this synchronous approach where they're face-to-face with the students. And then they may break off and have an asynchronous time when the students may begin working on a website, I don't know, Seesaw or what have you. And so the staffing there has to be in sync with what we're doing on the school level. And so I would say that communication, what we've learned from this process is just making sure that we communicate, and the consistency piece of making sure things stay the same. I know that a lot of the schools, probably one of the challenges for the remote, a lot of the sites was that some of the scheduling may not have been the same for all of the students online. And I'll go ahead and admit Petrie was probably contributing to that, because we brainstormed a schedule that we would get the most bang for our buck with that. Our students were online. We said if we get them, we're going to keep them. It's almost like a sermon. We're not going to stop and take up the offering. We're going to keep them as long as we can keep them there, so that we can get the most bang for our buck. And that may not have matched up with some of the other schools. But I think that learning process, as we went through, we tweaked a little bit. And Betty knows that, we had our students grouped in chunks, but now we've kind of tweaked a little bit to make it a little bit easier for the centers. It was great for us at the school level, but I'm sure that it was a logistical nightmare maybe over at the centers. But we did work it out, and it seemed to work well now that we've got the kinks worked out.
Pastor Scovens and Betty, you may also want to speak to the fact, I think one of the things that churches and community organizations bring is that they have a trust relationship in the community. Mm-hmm. They may be already working in a neighborhood, working with families. So how does that enter into how you envision the future unfolding as you keep working with Petrie?
I believe that relationship is paramount for the success of these programs. We were already in relationship with Petrie. Didn't have any relationship with Imprints, but it was an easy fit for us because their values aligned with ours. And so I think that's important. Your values have to be in sync. The other thing that I am looking forward to is perhaps an expansion that perhaps we can do something on Saturdays for families that need the remote learning. What I've also seen is the benefit that some children are more focused because there are fewer distractions and the classroom sizes are smaller. I've also envisioned that perhaps when children return to school, that if there are suspensions, we don't have to send them home to play video games. We can send them to remote learning sites and instruction can continue. So there is an opportunity for growth and expansion to reimagine education in a way where it's a holistic approach and concerted effort from community. And I think it puts everybody in a position to have a stake in the success of the children. It was very important for the United Way to invest monies into the program. And it was important that Imprints already had the framework. We had the space, and the school system, they have the meat and potatoes. So I think everyone plays a role. And I saw a question in the chat of what can you do individually? Certainly you can always donate funds. They're very particular about people volunteering because of the safety issues with COVID. I think that's also a help for the success of our program, is that each student, they're in the same space with the same folks. So it's almost like a remote learning quarantined effort. So it's just been a win. I know that there are times you want to look for holes, but there are very few holes in this one. And it's just been a very successful program. The challenge is that we probably all have is just making sure that kids are at the bus stop and kids are getting to the programming, but that's a home issue. And so that's just probably the next challenge, is making sure that parents are doing their part. But that's nothing new. That's something we've been facing for a long time, but the opportunity is there, and it's just been a great program. I hope that helps give some perspective.
It does. So Ms. McManus, hearing all of this, what do you think about how the system might begin to address this, as you've already talked about wanting to move forward, even with collecting resources from individuals or some partners in that? What are some thoughts?
And Ms. McManus, as you gather your thought there are a couple of questions in the chat that speak to what Sylvia is asking. One of those has to do with the resources you might make available to sites for Saturday efforts or after school efforts. And the second has to do with requirements, because we really had some difficulty at the beginning with the memorandums of agreement with the school system. So could you speak to resources and requirements when you're answering Sylvia's question?
Yes, absolutely. And I was unmuting. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not told you're muted. So I was like, I need to unmute before I start. So basically, I think as far as resources, there are resources available. Let me just say this: funding resources. There are many that come with strings attached, obviously. So a lot of our funding that we receive from like federal dollars or state dollars, there are parameters placed on those dollars. But right now we have, as far as the Saturday academies, what I'm going to look into, we have dollars that we're giving to schools called at-risk dollars that come from the federal government that are, or the state, I'm sorry, that are designed specifically to support students that may be a little bit behind. And so what we're doing right now is figuring out, based on data, based on engagement numbers, based on student assessment data, how much should be given to each school. So as I'm sitting here on the call today, the first thing I'm going to do is figure out, is there any way that we could provide some of that to some of to our learning centers, so that they could actually implement Saturday academies? Because what you need is, we'll provide the educational resources, books, materials, things like that we definitely can use funds for. But I think what our centers need is, if they're going to have adults there that need to be paid for that time, that they can provide, they can compensate those individuals. So that's where the funding is needed. So we are doing several partnerships and grants where we're getting additional funds to hire more tutors. And so if we had the facilities like we do now with our churches and the other locations, we could probably even send people to them. We just need, again, to have the location. So several things. One will be, let me look into other funds that we're getting, grant related funds. As we think about expanding this down the road, I'm thinking about some major grants. And if we do bring all the players to the table, you know, I'd love to see a center on every corner. I mean, that would be, because then you could have kids walk there. That would be my dream, is that every student that needs to access a place after school to get support and encouragement and additional tutorials, that they can get there and that it's easily accessible. And so, you know, there's many layers. So I will look into additional funds that we can provide to the centers, because I know that's something we haven't been able to do. And so folks that can actually provide monetary donations is great. When we get back to a time when we can have volunteers, when we get there, we'll get there one day, then obviously volunteers are amazing. The thing we have to work on is, if we're going to actually close achievement gaps, is that it's very specific tutorials. You have to have the right materials. You've got to have the right targets you're working on with students based on what exactly they need. And so it's not just a matter of, it always helps to have an adult just read with a child. That's helpful. But when we're talking about helping to close gaps, we're talking about very intentional, focused lessons. And so we can help with all that. So I don't know if I helped. I'm looking, let's see, involve volunteer training. Yes, we absolutely, that is something that we can provide in our resourcing, is any kind of training, any kind of instructional materials, libraries that can be put into our centers where students can have access to books, because that's another issue. If they're not coming into school and having access to lots of books, can they get those in the remote learning centers? Absolutely, and we can provide that. The continued access to technology. We do have more Wi-Fi devices if anybody needs them, by the way. We've continued to gather computers and Wi-Fi devices. So the school system plays a huge role in making sure that our centers are really equipped. But we'll continue to look for funds for special things like Saturday academies or opening during spring break. Not that kids want to be learning 24/7, but they need that extra support outside of school as well.
I am hearing one of the questions that Dr. Nash has posed that I think is important for us to think about. And I love your vision of a remote learning center on every corner. I mean, I love the idea that we would have such a community wraparound of children, that all children could get the help and the support they need. And we have churches on just about every corner in town. Some churches may be better equipped than others to open their doors. But I think the question then becomes, if you're going to have well-qualified, well-trained, consistent adults that are there all the time, you almost have to move beyond the ranks of volunteers to people who are paid, who can be there, who know that's their job, they're well-trained, or they have experience in teaching, whether it's retirement or whatever. So this is a challenge for us as a community, is, are we willing to put the resources available to do this kind of wraparound of all of our kids? I am very aware that with every decade, we have loaded more and more on schools in terms of what they're expected to provide to kids. And sometimes I think that has perhaps unloaded them so much that their ability to focus on academics or on the newest techniques in instruction and experiential learning are limited, because they've got to do so many other things as well. So I would like to ask you, Dr. McManus, as you're in your interim period and beyond, what would you envision, and perhaps Reverend Scovens and Ms. Bailey and Ms. West could also weigh in with you, what would it look like to have the kind of coordinated, ongoing task force that involves genuine community participation, so that we could really get ahead of the game and start thinking out of the box for long-term transformation in a genuine school community partnership? What do you envision in terms of a community task force?
So So that is the vision, and that's exactly what you just described is exactly what we need to do. It's create the community task force with diverse representation, and obviously many of the people that have chosen to spend the hour with us today that are typing in the chat. This is a good starting group, as well as other folks that may not be on the call. But what we have to have to be successful in this is the task force that regularly meets, identify district staff that this is what they do. It's this organization of the community, because it's not just about conversations to make something like this work, which I know we could. It takes a lot of deliberate actions after every conversation. So leaving the planning table and actually doing. And where I've seen when things don't work, it's because there are not the designated people that can actually keep the coordination alive. Your boots on the ground that can regularly work with, not only the task force, but the boots on the ground, the people in the centers. They need to have a regular back and forth communication with the school system, because again, these are our students. All of us are responsible for our students. And so I think the next step would be, if this is definitely something that everyone is passionate about and thinks will make a huge difference, it's to go ahead and form a task force and start having the meetings and create a way of work and create a true vision, a way of work, figure out who needs to do what funding are we going to use, how do we expand. There's just a lot of moving parts, but that's why we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are success stories across the country. I was reading about one in Minneapolis, where they have many organizations in their, plus the school district, working together on a tutorial. It's called the Tutoring Partnership. So I think we just need to start exploring, reading, learning what's working around the country, create that task force and get busy. We're on board as a district, school district. If the community is on board, we need to figure out who needs to be at the table and diverse representation of our community, and get started. We're on board.
What I'd like to say too, just to add to that, I think we can look at what we've done on a small scale and replicate that, because we've almost had, I know we've met with, worked closely with Chuck Spahn and the Grace Court Initiative for him to be a convener and bring us all together. And it's almost like we've begun this already. I do need to say one last thing about vision. We have to keep this vision alive, because these children that we are serving at Galilee and at all the wonderful centers are always the same children that when the money runs out, it's dropped. And we need to be able to continue what we're doing. The Saturday Academy is a brilliant idea, and just being able to do before and after, and hopefully it won't be too much longer before we can get back into school buildings to do before and after as well. But we have to keep this vision alive and keep these children mean too much to us. And so, I know with Imprints Cares, we want to be part of that vision. We want to stay connected and definitely grow these partnerships.
And I would
go ahead, Dr. Bailey. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I would also add, with that, to have some parents as part of that team as well. Just a parent representative for us has been key for relationships, because our parents feel comfortable sending their students to the center. And I think that is because of the communication that we've, as a school, when they hear from us, they hear about the partnership that we've developed with the church, with Imprints, and so they do feel comfortable. So that's a big piece that I do think could be a part of that initiative as well. And then as principal, I look at the teacher side of it and how we equipped our teachers, because not only do the students have to, they attend the center for that remote learning piece, but then there's also, how does that instruction look online as we get ready to teach students? Because teaching on camera is a lot different from teaching face to face with students. So there's there's a piece that you have to keep in mind as well when you talk about engagement with students.
Dr. Scovens, the final word.
In terms of growth and opportunity going forward, I believe that we need to add a component for our universities, colleges and universities, in that remote learning is the wave of the future. So we probably can expand by having student teachers to participate in this process early on, so that when they're full-blown teachers, they don't have to experience the shock of trying to teach online. It was very difficult, even for me, preaching to an empty room virtually every Sunday initially. So I think that's one way we can expand the program, make it stronger, add another community piece, and perhaps create opportunities to save some money by using the students as teachers and allowing them to get credit. So there's work to be done, a lot of opportunities for growth and expansion, but it can be a wonderful partnership if we remain committed.
I would like to say, I know we're out of time. When Sylvia and others on our planning committee and I began planning this, we got more and more excited and knew that probably an hour wasn't going to be enough. This is, I think what this does though, maybe, at least for me, is to create a very rich vision about possibility. That there is the possibility for us to re-envision the way schools and communities connect and what schools of the future need to look like. And whether that involves freedom schools, Saturday academies, university tutors, using them as tutors, as Dr. Scovens has just said. There are many different models that are very effective, but I think what's going to be the key component is, number one, can we maintain community commitment to the vision? Mm-hmm. Number two, can we find practical ways to have coordination at the top and then coordination at each site on the local level, so that all centers are operating using best practices, evidence-based learning, building trust with parents and community and neighborhoods. So there, as Dr. Scovens wisely reminded us, there's work to be done, a lot of work, but I think it's doable. And I think this community has resources we haven't begun to tap in terms of how to make this work more effectively. So I'd like to close that with a note of hope that I'm trusting that both with divine guidance and individual commitment, we can make something really new and exciting happen here, so that within before I leave this universe, that we will actually eliminate disparities in our student achievement, and all of our kids will realize their potential that's given by God. So thank you for being here. Could we all just kind of give a thumbs up for these wonderful panel members and for the work they've done already and continue to do, working together and individually for our students. So thank you, Ms. McManus. We are praying for you in your role, for you, Principal Bailey, for you, Ms. West, for you, Pastor Scovens. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful holiday season. Sylvia and I would also like to add, the next Faith in the City will be the first Tuesday in January, which I think, Sylvia, is the 5th.
It's the 5th, January the 5th, yes.
We're
awesome.
Still working on the topic, partly because there's such a moving target in terms of where we'll be pandemic-wise, but we've got a whole list of wonderful topics. So do plan to join us on the 5th as we continue this work. And thank you. Let somebody know if you want to be part of this community task force or other ways of being involved. I assume that you can probably find, I know you can find our emails, and maybe you can locate Ms. McManus. I'm not sure she wants that email opened quite that widely, but let's get to it, everybody. Thank you. And have a wonderful holiday season.
And we've also posted in the chat room our Facebook link. So please join us on our Facebook page and help us continue this conversation. Thank you again. Hope to see you on the 5th of January.
And today's program was recorded, right, Sylvia?
Yes, it was. So we'll post it on the Facebook page, as well as send it to anyone who might want an individual copy. Thank you again very much for everyone being here. Have a good week.
Thank you.